Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs.
That's right.
And this isn't just, a quick summary. We're really aiming to get into the core of what made him tick based on Isaacson's incredible access, all those interviews.
Exactly. We want to look beyond just what he did, the products, the company, and explore how he did it, his personality, his methods, the whole picture.
Our idea is to give you, the listener, those key insights, maybe some surprising facts, without getting totally lost in the weeds. A sharp understanding, fast.
Think of it as, well, a shortcut to the essence of Jobs, using Isaacson's work as our guide.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Early life. Isaacson spends quite a bit of time on his adoption and his father, Paul Jobs.
Yeah, and that influence seems really fundamental. Paul Jobs was a mechanic, a craftsman.
Right.
And he taught Steve this deep appreciation for, well, craftsmanship, making things right, even the parts you can't see.
That seems so key, doesn't it? This idea that the quality inside, the hidden bits, matter just as much.
Absolutely. Isaacson suggests this planted a seed for, Apple's later obsession with detail. It wasn't just about the shiny surface. It was about the integrity of the whole thing.
It's one of those moments reading it where you go, okay. You see the thread connecting that garage workshop to, like, the inside of an iMac years later.
Exactly. And the book also hints at those early sparks, brilliance, yes, but also that rebellious streak. You sort of see the complex character forming already.
It really makes you think about how those early experiences shape you, doesn't it? That mix of appreciating craft but also wanting to push against things.
Definitely. For Jobs, it seems like that combination was really potent right from the start.
So fast forward a bit to the mid-'70s. The famous garage, Apple, Steve Wozniak.
A dynamic duo.
Yeah. And while the Apple II was huge, Isaacson really positions the Macintosh as, well, Jobs' baby, right?
Yeah.
Where his vision of blending art and tech really came together.
Totally. And it's crucial, like Isaacson points out, Jobs wasn't the engineer. That was Woz.
Right. Woz was the wizard behind the curtain, technically.
Jobs was the visionary, the one pushing for his idea of what it should be. The book details his relentless focus on things like fonts.
The fonts. And the case design, the exact curve, it sounds obsessive.
It was obsessive, but it wasn't just fiddling. It came from this core belief that every single element impacted the user's experience. It had to be seamless, end to end.
That philosophy really defined Apple later on, didn't it? That total control over the experience. It wasn't just about making it work.
No, it was about making it feel right, even delightful. He understood early on, I think, that technology wasn't just functional, it was also emotional. People connect with these objects.
Which kind of leads us perfectly into this concept. Isaacson explores the reality distortion field.
Ah, yes, that famous phrase.
How does Isaacson really define that? It sounds like something out of sci-fi.
Well, he paints it as this potent mix of charisma, sheer confidence, unwavering belief, and just persistence. Jobs could use it to convince people, engineers, partners, himself sometimes, that the impossible was actually possible.
So it's like a superpower, almost.
In a way, yeah. But like most superpowers, it had a dark side, or at least a difficult side. It drove incredible achievements, getting teams to deliver things they thought couldn't be done.
What?
But it could also be manipulative, right?
Yeah.
Setting totally unrealistic expectations, putting immense pressure on people. It's fascinating because it shows how one personality trait can be both an incredible strength and a potential weakness. Polarizing.
Yeah, you can see how that would be incredibly motivating, but also maybe terrifying to work with.
Definitely. And that intensity, perhaps, played a role in what happened next, his departure from Apple in '85. The power struggle.
Huge setback, obviously. But Isaacson frames that period away from Apple as really important, almost transformative.
It really was. He founded NXT. Now, NXT computers weren't, a massive commercial hit.
Not like Apple.
But the technology they developed, especially the software NXT step, it was sophisticated, ahead of its time, object-oriented programming, great graphical interface.
And that became the foundation for
macOS, exactly. When Apple eventually bought NXT, they were essentially buying the future of their operating system. So a commercial failure maybe, but a huge technological stepping stone.
And then there was Pixar. Completely different venture.
Totally different. Buying what was then Lucasfilm's computer graphics division and turning it into this animation powerhouse. Isaacson shows this wasn't just about tech anymore. It was about storytelling, understanding audiences on an emotional level.
So that period, those NXT and Pixar years, it wasn't wasted time. It was actually crucial for his development.
Absolutely. It broadened his skills, his perspective. He learned about software architectures at NXT, about entertainment and storytelling at Pixar. It shows how failures or things that don't pan out as expected can actually be incredibly valuable learning experiences.
Yeah.
Lessons he definitely brought back.
Which brings us to the return. Apple buys NXT in 96. Jobs comes back to a company that's, well, almost dead.
Bleeding money, losing market share, adrift. It looked pretty dire.
And he comes back, initially as an advisor, then interim CEO, then officially CEO in 97, and just turns everything around.
It's an incredible comeback story. And then the products start flowing. The iMac.
Totally changed perceptions of what a computer could look like.
And the iPod, iTunes, the iPhone, the iPad. It wasn't just new products. He was redefining entire industries, one after another.
And Isaacson really emphasizes the core philosophy behind all of them, right?
Yeah, it all comes back to those key principles. Simplicity. Integration hardware and software working together seamlessly. Minimalism in the design. And above all, the user experience. Making complex technology feel intuitive and, well, simple.
And a huge part of that product revolution was his partnership with Jony Ive.
Oh, absolutely central. Isaacson describes this incredibly close collaboration, this almost mind meld they had on design.
They obsessed over everything.
Everything. The materials, the finish, the weight, the sound of a click, even the packaging, the whole unboxing experience was considered part of the product design.
That famous attention to detail again.
And it connects back to his belief in closed systems. Controlling the hardware and the software allowed Apple to achieve that level of integration and consistency that others struggled with.
It's a very Apple-specific approach, isn't it? That tight control.
It is. And related to that, here's something Isaacson highlights that listeners might find surprising. Jobs' deep skepticism about market research.
Right. He didn't really use focus groups, did he?
Not really. He famously said things like, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. He believed his own intuition, his own taste, was the best guide.
Which is pretty bold. And risky.
Extremely risky. It worked spectacularly for him, obviously, but it's a very contrarian stance in business. It raises big questions about intuition versus data, doesn't it?
Definitely. Now, we've touched on his intensity, but let's talk specifically about his leadership style. Isaacson doesn't pull any punches here.
No, he doesn't. The book is full of examples of Jobs being incredibly blunt, harsh, even cruel sometimes, very low tolerance for anything he saw as second-rate or, bozo work.
That binary view people were either a genius or a bozo.
Exactly. It created this environment of intense pressure, fear even, for some. He could be brutal in meetings.
But Isaacson balances that, right? He talks to people who worked for him.
Yes, and this is the paradox. Many of those same people, while acknowledging how difficult he was, also say they did the absolute best work of their lives under him. He pushed them beyond what they thought they were capable of.
So the demanding nature, the incredibly high standards, actually drove excellence, even if the methods were questionable.
That seems to be the conclusion. It's that double-edged sword again. It forces you to think about the trade-offs, Can you achieve that level of breakthrough innovation without that kind of relentless, sometimes brutal drive? Or is there a better way? Jobs clearly believed his way was necessary.
Interesting. And Isaacson also delves into another, maybe less expected side of Jobs, his spiritual interests.
Right. His early experimentation with LSD, which he felt was profound, and his later very deep engagement with Zen Buddhism.
Which might seem disconnected from building computers.
At first glance, maybe. But Isaacson draws a pretty clear line between Zen principles, simplicity, focus, intuition, minimalism, and the design philosophy that came to define Apple.
So that clean, uncluttered aesthetic wasn't just a stylistic choice. It had deeper roots for him.
That's the argument Isaacson makes, and it's quite compelling. That Zen influence permeated the company's design language.
But there's also a downside mentioned in the book regarding his beliefs, isn't there? Particularly concerning his health.
Yes, and it's a really sobering part of the biography. His initial reluctance to follow conventional medical advice for his pancreatic cancer, opting instead for alternative therapies for a crucial period, Isaacson suggests his spiritual beliefs, or perhaps his reality distortion field applied to his own biology, might have played a role.
That's tough. A difficult reminder about balancing personal beliefs and, well, medical reality.
It really is a complex and ultimately tragic element of his story.
So moving towards the end of his life, he passed away in 2011, relatively young, 56. Isaacson describes his final years as being very focused on legacy.
Immensely focused, not just on products, but on ensuring Apple itself would endure. Things like the design for the new Apple Park campus, pushing iCloud forward, really trying to embed his values into the company culture.
He wanted to build something that would last beyond him.
Exactly. But ultimately, as Isaacson concludes, his legacy isn't just Apple, the company, or even the iconic products. It's how he fundamentally changed how we interact with technology, how we communicate, how we consume media. He truly reshaped daily life for millions, if not billions, of people.
He put that dent in the universe he talked about.
He certainly did.
And Isaacson includes some powerful quotes that really capture his thinking.
Mm.
I mean, that famous one. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Yeah, that just screams Jobs, doesn't it? That audacity, that belief in radical change.
And another one you mentioned earlier, implicitly. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works.
Perfect summary of his philosophy. It wasn't just decoration, it was the core functionality, the soul of the product. Form and function were one.
And maybe one more. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower.
That relentless drive to be first, to create the next thing, not just copy or refine, it drove him constantly.
So pulling it all together, the biography presents this incredibly complex figure. Visionary tyrant, genius, bully.
Minimalist, obsessive, all these contradictions packed into one person.
Yeah.
Isaacson does a great job, I think, of showing all those facets, acknowledging the flaws, the difficult parts, but also celebrating the undeniable impact.
He doesn't shy away from the negative, but the overall picture is one of extraordinary achievement.
Absolutely. It's a balanced portrait of someone who was, well, deeply human, but also achieved superhuman things.
Okay, so that wraps up our deep dive into Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs. We really hope this gave you a concentrated dose of insight into this truly pivotal figure.
The key takeaways, the complexities, the things that made him so influential, without needing to read all 600 pages, perhaps.
Exactly. And to leave you with something to think about, reflecting on Jobs, his methods, his personality, what parts of his approach do you think are still really relevant today? What lessons can we take?
And maybe, what are the cautionary tales? Where do you draw the line? Perhaps think about that tension we discussed, the push for perfection versus, creating a humane and sustainable environment for people to actually do the work. It's a question that hasn't gone away.
A lot to consider there. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.